get you onto the other line. That many Prof in the and come up. Prof, can you hear me?
Yes, I
Yes.
can hear you. Apologies for the interruption earlier.
That's fine. So I was asking that, per this directive, what will be the impact on Ghana's economy and generally under the AGWA, the Access to Growth and Opportunity Act, which mandated African countries to freely export, without any hurdle. That particular arrangement will no longer exist for African countries. Depending on the level of export you are doing, you would have to pay a corresponding tariff to the American government. And so how does it situate the African continent in terms of the trade effects with America?
Okay, thank you very much. I think earlier I heard Dr. Joseph Obin explaining the effect, and
exactly.
I agree with him largely. Let's start from Ghana, and then we can escalate it to the rest of the continent. If you look at Ghana, our trade vulnerability report from the Ghana Statistical Service, U.S. is not a major export destination for Ghana.
Okay.
That's the fact. Who are the major export destinations for Ghana? We are talking about United Arab Emirates. We are talking about China. We are talking about the Asian countries. And then you cannot also ignore Switzerland because of cocoa exports and all of that. So when you look at it from that angle, you say that we should not weep more than the bereaved. When I say we should not weep more than the bereaved, there are other countries, bigger economies that are much more exposed in terms of their trade vulnerability or export destination to the U.S. Okay, so if you look at the light, and they are trying to, given their size, they are trying to retaliate in one way or the other. You can talk about Canada.
Okay.
You can talk about China, you can talk about Europe, and the rest of them. But of course, even though U.S. may not be a major, so to speak, in terms of other products, and then within AGWA, as you rightly mentioned, exports of non-traditional exports, so to speak, apparel, the rest of them, yes, it's still a bigger market for us to explore. Even under AGWA, we have not been able to take maximum advantage of the opportunities under AGWA. And it's largely a reflection of our own local capacity challenges and all of that, and lack of competitiveness of our private sector and all the challenges we have been talking about over the years. So those have been the constraining factors and all of that. But in my earlier conversation, I was saying that if you look at what COVID did to the global economy and how countries sought to respond from the effects of COVID, countries abandoned the common good for their individual member country interest.
Okay.
And that was what escalated what we call the global geopolitics, geo-economic fragmentation, the rise of regionalism and nationalism. So if you look at even the fight with PPEs, you remember PPEs, those days during COVID.
Yes, exactly. The export of it and how the less developed countries will get it.
PPEs, how countries were hoarding it.
Exactly.
And how U.S. became exposed to the extent that they consider some of these things to be national security issues. U.S. became so exposed that even states within the U.S. were competing about importing PPEs from China. And China was also hoarding it, looking at their interests. Then we moved on from PPEs to the vaccine. Do you remember the vaccine?
Yes, I remember the vaccine, yes. How it became very scarce.
And how African countries, through the AU, begged the developed countries to even give us the right to manufacture it here. You know what they said? They said no. They will not give us the right to manufacture it here. They will manufacture it there and export it to us. at a time when our citizens were dying, the privileged few, when I say privileged few, maybe I'm looking at it in terms of numbers. We had the numbers, South Africa and the rest of them, but Europe was unwilling to give us the copyright. US, North America, they were unwilling to give us the copyright. In fact, what we call selfishness rose to its highest level. Every country was looking within. Every country was looking within how they could respond. So COVID taught countries that it's not everything you can outsource. And the U.S. realized that their competitiveness, their manufacturing sector had become so dependent to their enemies, supposedly enemies.
China in this case.
Yes, China. So from there, they started looking within. In fact, there was the politics about semiconductors and all of that, earthenware. So this is another level. And even if you look at the data, you realize that right after COVID, FDI flows, foreign direct investment, countries started scaling back. They were looking within how they would strengthen their own competitiveness. In fact, the disruptions to the global supply chain and all of that affected countries like Ghana more. And that is how come Ghana's food inflation rose. Within 8 months, Ghana's food inflation in 2022 rose up by more than 122% because of disruptions to the global supply chain and all of that. We're not getting the food supply to come and complement the limited local production and all of that. Okay, fast forward. Then America realizes that, look, and despite all the complaints and everything, data supports that American tariff system favors the rest of the world to the detriment of U.S. That is a fact. Look, between 2001 and 2028, the U.S. elections with Obama, Hillary Clinton, and all of them, one basic issue that dominated their debate was various trade agreements that U.S. had signed with the rest of the world, including the North Atlantic Trade Agreement, Europe, and the rest of them. They felt that all of that were inimical to the interests of U.S. And the working class, and it practically and systematically undermined U.S. manufacturing sector, the steel, automobile, and the rest of them. So Obama campaigned on the back of the fact that he will review this trade agreement. But when he got to power, he didn't do it. The Democrats, even with George Bush, all of them. But what are we seeing now? We are seeing a different America in Donald Trump, who says, I'm going to do exactly what I said I will do. They want to rebuild the American manufacturing sector. They want to reduce their trade deficit. And U.S. has one of the biggest trade deficits in the whole world. Trade deficit is a testament of the competitiveness of your industry and your vulnerability to the rest of the world. America, through trade, unfavorable trade terms, had become a bit more vulnerable to even Asia, a bit more vulnerable to China, to Europe, to Canada, and the rest of the world. Because America felt that they should rather focus on the hegemony of the dollar. The dollar being a global currency, underlining trade, and by so doing, they gave up so many things, but they realized that the hegemony of the dollar alone does not solve the problem, because in those countries, the dollar does not depreciate the way it should in order to make American exports to Europe and China and Canada competitive. And therefore, they were losing out.
So, Prof, that is the angle where I was going to. I mean, in terms of international trade and investment, I mean, this is a deliberate attempt by the U.S. government to take out certain policies. I mean, the BBC, as of this morning, has published the top 10 most affected countries on the African continent. So you look at Lesotho. Lesotho, they've imposed over 50% on the textiles import they do, and that is equivalent to 20% of the total share of African export to the U.S. market. You look at Madagascar. You look at Madagascar does 47% in terms of tariffs. They are taking 16% share of total export. Mauritius, 40% tariffs. They are taking 11% share. Botswana, 37% tariff, 7% share of the market. Angola is doing 32% with only 3% share of the export market. Then you talk about Libya, South Africa, Algeria, Tunisia, and then Ivory Coast doing 5% of the market share. So in total,
but you see that Ghana is not mentioned strongly in there, right?
Exactly, Ghana is not here.
I told you that Ghana, US is not a major export destination for Ghana.
Kessben.
Right. Okay, so let's come to this. Okay, we've looked at all of the data, including what the BBC has put out there.
Okay.
But look at it this way. If you look at what the US has done is what we call a graduated tariff system. A graduated tariff system. So a graduated tariff system has a baseline tariff. So there's a baseline 10%.
Okay.
Which also affected Ghana. So there's a baseline. From there, the US then moves into what we call reciprocal tariff system. That's the graduated.
Okay.
So everybody has the 10%. Now, after the 10%, depending on the tariffs these countries then impose on American export to their countries, they get what we call reciprocal tariffs.
I see.
Okay.
Yes.
So, for instance, if Ghana doesn't impose sufficient tariffs on American import to Ghana, then we only get a 10% baseline.
Okay.
But if the U.S. realize that, Ghana has been imposing a lot of tariffs on U.S. export to Ghana, then they do the reciprocal. They do the calculation. That's how some countries are getting 40%, 50%, 45%, 35%. That's what we call the reciprocal, which is a level above the baseline that every country gets.
Interesting.
Now, if you look at the data, hello?
Yes, I'm here. I'm with you, Prof.
If you look at the data, until recently, U.S. is one of the advanced economies that imposes the lowest tariffs on all imports coming to the U.S. That's the fact.
Okay.
That's the fact. And while U.S. imposes on the average, let's say 10%, other countries impose tariffs on U.S. export to their countries to the tune of 53%. Are you aware? Some of them 53%. Some of them 45%, and the rest of them. So you will see that, look, and anybody who has taken time to study Trump, right? You will realize that Trump is a tariff person. From the 80s to the 90s, every single interview Trump granted, he was concerned about how U.S. was undermining itself by being so Father Christmas to the rest of the world, to the detriment of American businesses.
So, Prof,
and they feel that tariffs is one of the direct ways of correcting these imbalances. Okay, and then so there will be disruptions, and U.S. is not ignorant of that. There will be disruptions, and all of that. But they believe that these temporary disruptions will also bring in the much-needed revenue, which they can also invest in retooling and to support the American private sector and businesses. That's what Trump is saying, that there's a way to avoid these tariffs. Come and set up in the U.S. Come and expand your businesses in the U.S. Why is it that, look, there's practically less than 10% in America, 10% of America in American homes. Okay. I'm sure you heard that story, right?
Exactly.
That in every American home, there's practically 10% of America in their homes. Meaning that almost all the things they use in their homes
foreign, yes,
are foreign, either from China or the rest. We can say it's the same thing in Ghana. Okay, let's come home. You know, in the 2025 budget, right? The president of Ghana, they are saying that they will use the procurement to promote made in Ghana goods.
Exactly.
We are also doing our own version, right? Every country is doing their own version and all of that. So yes, we can escalate it to Africa broadly and the rest of them. Look, we are at a point where every country is trying to be selfish to be survival compliant.
Prof, wrapping up with you, I mean, this is not supposed to, allow African countries to see the American government and the American president in a very bad light. But just as you...
But that's what it is. That's what it is. We may not say it openly, but we know what it is.
Very well. But, the Ministry for Industry and Trade has issued a statement. Now, they have indicated that as of today, the Foreign Affairs Minister, together with his colleagues, Minister for Finance and then for Trade and Industry, will be meeting with the U.S. Ambassador to Ghana, to discuss as to how best they can deal with this particular imposition. Now, the concerns are that all these horticultural crops, basic yam tubers and all of that, other crops which serve as foodstuffs are very essential. Probably most of these things are exported to the African market in America. And so what can be done to reduce the burden of those who are exporting, so to speak, lowering the prices on these particular commodities as far as they get to the shores of America?
I wish our sector ministers all the best. I wish them all the best. Repentance is not on the table from the U.S. perspective.
I see.
Okay. Yeah, because the countries with stronger bargaining power will try to negotiate and all of that. Others are making calls directly to White House. Okay, so if we are calling the ambassador here to meet them, I wish them all the best. What I would
so in effect, this is much ado about nothing. It wouldn't have any effect.
We have to check the box. It's not good news to say we are not doing anything. Is that okay? But what I'm saying is that there is an emergency act that the U.S. passed. Okay, out of it, these executive orders are anchored and all of that. So there's a bigger stake that the U.S. wants to correct.
Okay.
And we should look at it from that perspective.
That interest will come first before any other interest.
It's America first.
Okay.
It's America first. Look, in the same way that China will say it's China first. It is Africa that thinks that the rest of the world is first. Okay? It's Ghana that thinks that the rest of the world is first. And we don't come in at all. You should know that our constitution, our statehood, and all of that puts Ghana first.
But Rob, you are very much aware that this deliberate act, destroys the object of the International World Trade Organization. In terms of investment and world trade, these are some of the things that discourages the third world nations. And we equally feel that they are only taking an advantage of us. And so such hegemonies, must not come into play if we really want to have a borderless system of trade among ourselves, continent to continent. These are some of the things that would deter people from also ensuring some of these things are done.
Master, the world, since data started, has never been fair to Africa. It has never, and it will never. You get what you negotiate for. You get what you work for to some extent. That is how we should look at it. Look, let's come home. Why is Africa crying? Why is Africa weeping more than they bleed? Do you know something?
I'm with you, bro.
Of all the continents in the world, it's Africa that trades far less among itself. Even within Africa, intra-regional trade is as low as 18%. Europe trades significantly among themselves. It's more than 50%. North America, it's more than 50%. Look, Asia, they trade more among themselves. So why can't Africa come together, right,
Is it because we don't have the capacity? I mean, most of the African countries are not industrialized anyway.
We put more premium on our differences than what should unite us.
Okay.
This was what Dr. Kwame Nkrumah spoke about long ago. And he used his blood and the resources of Ghana to fight for the liberation of Africa, African unity. What have we done since Nkrumah died? Let me tell you something. You know, we have our own version of what we call the African Continental Free Trade Area.
Yes, indeed.
Let's ask the Minister of Trade and Industry, what percentage of the market share has Ghana taken since the guided trade initiative started in 2021? Hello? Do you get the point I'm making?
Yes, I do, Prof. I do.
Let's ask. Look, Ghana has issued more certificates to our own businesses under the guided trade initiative than the export that we have done. Under the guided trade initiative, the countries that are even doing well, Ghana is not one of them. The reality is that intra-regional trade in Africa actually involves much more value added, okay, compared to trade between Africa and the rest of the world.
Very well.
Look, when Trump started all these things, China and the rest of them are looking at how they can expand trade within Asia. They are building roads, canals to connect China to the rest of the East Asian countries and all of that. What is Africa doing? Do you know that as we speak right now, for Ghana to even export to Cote d'Ivoire here, it has to go to Europe for it to be redirected to Cote d'Ivoire?
I see.
Yeah. As we speak right now, do you know that it's more expensive traveling within Africa than between Africa and the rest of the world? Let me tell you something. What is happening in the U.S., it depends on the eye with which you look at it. If you look at it from a more positive mindset, it's an opportunity
for us to sit up.
For the continent of Africa to look more within.
Very well.
An increase in intra-regional trade, we can use that to build the competitiveness of our private sector, our businesses, and then refine our product to a more world standard level. Then we can also begin to also explore the rest of the world, the market. Other than that, where are you going? Look, what we export to the rest of the world that we want to protect, there are more raw materials. Is that not so? There are more raw materials. Crude oil, cocoa. These are the raw materials that the colonial masters came here to engineer and left for us to continue. And the raw materials is again to feed growing industries in Europe, North America, and now China has come in strongly. So we haven't done anything about the structure they left for us. More than 60 years ago, colonization, when they changed our food system, our economy from food-based production to crop-based production, what they call the cash crop revolution. Do you know that in 1930s, from the 1930s to 1957, Ghana's economy was one of the best in Sub-Saharan Africa?
Very well. Prof, I would have to leave
because of the cash crop revolution that they introduced and changed our economy to be more dependent on production and export of cash crops to feed growing industries. 50 years after independence, this is what Africa is still doing.
Prof, I'm grateful for your time this morning. I hope to speak to you again. Highly grateful this morning.
God bless you.
Thank you. And that is Professor Bokpin with the University of Ghana Business School. Now, Mamin Kwahumani, so now many the honorable Samson here in the Nkomo Deputy Minister at the Trade Ministry. Honorable, what do you mean? Can't pay a margin? Na empomo boko de
nyamia dum monso mo hoye
erade adarumba wode yenkwa ache ye matri nkwanso
etida wase
ya da senso so anope waje ye so body fo nso etio na wo mo hwe wa anope entiminim so obechia wo mo
yo yeni asida eduma no amefa kwa we so nchia motifo na enkanka body fo etiem na anope eche obia
Arbo, yeah, that's it. Now, yeah, you say we know, and they America buying at the 10% tariff at the ato, and near my sporty free Ghana ha at the America brochi memo say, and they nanka agua no hodie said ye be Africa grant in any idea maybe ma ye be open borders nanka fe wo de niema e remu aqua America aqua could digwa honma nanka ye free. They say under the agua regime no. Donald Trump or Mampenyin said there be they say idea be a free Ghana, any other African countries, no, as I say, attracted some level of tariffs. Your statement, Modia Bay, na nefa pimpa no anything, a dear ministry in so a year dear far way home.
Yo, Madaste. Lady Cano, second April, American president, Slapo, tariffs. On almost all countries are on money or more ididra. Oh, yes, and then you know. I can say unfortunate because America, independent state,
Kessben.
Ghana, independent state, and since 1957, America, bilateral trade relations. After her ache. And she Nanka, the papa moon say, Mano ya dear be not say, oh, Pessoa Waguna. That's one called Bomberman.
Aye.
Nanka, ya Tanasi. Now discuss it. Now, you all crank back and say, oh, effective maybe 1 year. But also, yeah, now, why introduce that 10% tariffs on us? No, never can say, unfortunate. But, I still Enti adena yebeye as o mine. I'm another person I'm at the call foreign affairs ministry.
Okay.
The minister of Tukwain and another Nidachi into Niha and now croak ya foreign affairs minister, finance minister, and trade minister. Ye kwakushia American ambassador na o chaya same here. America are taking steps, against Ghana. No. Na yahu quite a fast one. Everything reduce effect on Ghanaian exporters. Na Senebeya affected Omojuma Omoyen. And she Senamakano. A buying food said we have to engage America for explanations, reason Chama Maya San. Na going forward, you quite a fast one. The Senebeya exported Juma and say na yakoso export into US economy. Like Okasa Okan Agua. This is opportunity. America diama some 35 African countries are yes for to Nima Eco America duty free. A one started tax free programmer African countries. And with the introduction of 10% tariffs, what happens to Agua? What is the state of Agua after the slapping of 10% tariffs on Ghana? And there are a lot of questions. We're going to engage the U.S. ambassador. Now, what I can say is, export to America, a draft, Omonya Abutre, Omonka Kuma to Muyum, a year Ghana, and America Bayano, as tariffs, we don't see a year Omona about factor because about affecting Ghana's economy.
Okay.
Or more, how much or more Ghana's economy is not ever into foreign a year sky about Ghana Mamina and about factor. Then government is taking it seriously. Now, what we can do to ensure that and they stop or more trade for this period.
Arbona utie obi nim defo bit is Professor Bokpin or chemu say 10% a baseline tariff wo mo dia to amaya hodo ni bebre so afei the principle of reciprocity ebeba afei America ban na ba be so man ben na America for aircraft ne manso dia bemu a wo mo de to atoto to wo mo so je say uhwemu a na je say oman a America nneɛma ahodoɔ a ɛbɛ mu a ɛtoɔ bebree na adeda so na kyerɛ sɛ Ghana yɛnhyɛ da ɛnka ho because 10% a yɛn yɛ face yi anɔpɛ BBC a publish country bi te sɛ Lesotho wɔn face over 50% tariff yɛn a yɛ nuanom Ivory Coast for over 21% tariff na kyerɛ sɛ wɔde toto ho anka yɛdeɛ ne yɛ kakra ne saa esan sɛ ni nneɛma ahodoɔ na ɛba ha no yɛn no yaban no ɛmfa atoɔ ɛnto so ɔmanpanyin Trump yi obi a ɔka asɛm a Edin so best sanadwe mu committee ya bay se anko wie se de mo pa aman be decide se ne yenso ye de to ni bi beto wo mo de so ana
I think aban be weigh the advantages and disadvantages of retaliation.
Okay.
You see a retaliation, what would be the implication on Ghana's economy? I mean, are true, sir, over America America by say one and Nanan Council Anomoko was we share a economy now very, very strong, stronger than Ghana. But also who's there almost well investment Ghana. I have to cry because of that relationship as a Sintinamaya allow that security military base Ghana. And America, even though was on the but want to me because we have for Sophia in free smaller countries, and I say we have for so free Ghana. Netibiano, we have benefits from Ghana, and we want to respect each other. Also, be respected. These are sovereign states. Nanya Shukurano also over Adibia one or two things who benefited from. But we believe say there are certain things who are you had to call America need competitive advantage of produce.
Okay.
And implementing this fully, very soon over will say even American consumers, I'm saying that you can't start a demonstration against that moves now to not some iron. And at the moment, what can say up 10% now. The meaning is that may the buyer call US. By the moment, go to one of the exactly. So directly, American consumer phone, and now almost ever faces that severity of Trump iron. And I believe say you better raise all these things, but I know say the American market, American consumers, almost more reactions towards that 10% tax tariff. Obama Trump also advise the position because this is idea. Both countries in advantages and disadvantages. If you are saying say promote to production in America, say companies don't move into America. How long? And I don't know ever take effect. Now in that period now, companies very located because generally Obiano say who produce outside say America, who produce Ghana, cheaper cost, who produce China, cheaper labor cost, as against America. And how long will it take? And Sana, so manufacturers, I just say that will relocate into America, but that space, not as a buyer as a Winnipia. How do
you feed your people? Yes,
that market, And there are a whole lot of issues there. Even though we're Canadian, but I don't think that Trump is looking at the economic aspect of it. He's just looking at accepting America's authority, American power over the world. I think that's what he's doing. But I don't want to say no. No one can who say yes. And last week, who follow American markets, a lot of people were scrambling to even buy cars. Obia person kotoka ama you see a cars and so kwano I bonzo ayedin and just say okay na waka dey but on one kasa pressure be kono so and if remember ya GDS say engaging them abema omo last that imposition and let's go into the meeting after the meeting abema omano swati obia that take his decision. I mean discussions now what could do.
Honorable Minister, I don't pay we wish you all the best with this particular meeting. My name is Samukoba. I don't do me any option. Ever sign wedding come up. I don't pay your that's Mr. Bedase, and Deputy Trade Minister for Deputy Minister for Trade, Agribusiness and Industry, Bodi Marabo Samson, he and Anope Yanino Eddie and Common bringing